Sir Marcus had served the royal family of Valdres for 23 years, but he had never seen anything like what happened that autumn morning. The leaves were turning golden outside the palace windows, and young Prince Alexander sat quietly in his study, staring at a letter that had arrived just hours before. Marcus remembered the day he first met the prince. Alexander was only 8 years old then, a small boy with curious blue eyes and an unusual habit of asking difficult questions. Most royal children learned early to accept their privileged position without question, but Alexander was different. Even as a child, he would ask Marcus why some people lived in grand palaces while others slept in the streets outside the palace gates. "Sir Marcus," the young prince had once asked during one of their walks through the royal gardens, "why don't we just give our extra food to the hungry people in town?" Marcus had smiled then, thinking it was just childish innocence. He had explained about traditions, about how kingdoms worked, about the responsibilities of royalty. But Alexander never seemed satisfied with those answers. As the years passed, the questions grew more complex, more challenging. Now, at 15, Prince Alexander had grown tall and thoughtful. His father, King William, often worried that his son was too soft-hearted for the harsh realities of ruling a kingdom. The Queen, meanwhile, hoped that Alexander would learn to balance compassion with practical leadership. But Marcus saw something in the young prince that perhaps even his parents missed, a quiet strength that ran deeper than anyone realized. The letter on Alexander's desk that morning came from the village of Millbrook, about 30 miles from the capital. Marcus knew the village well. He had grown up there before joining the Royal Guard. Millbrook had been struggling for months. The harvest had failed, and winter was approaching fast. The village elder had written to the king, begging for help, for grain from the royal stores, for anything that might help the families survive the coming cold months. King William had read the letter and set it aside. There were protocols for such requests, bureaucratic processes that took months to complete. The royal treasury was not unlimited, and there were many villages with similar needs. It was unfortunate, but the king had learned long ago that he could not solve every problem in his kingdom personally. Alexander, however, had asked to read the letter himself. Marcus watched the prince's face as he read about families with hungry children, about elderly people who might not survive another harsh winter without adequate food and warmth. The prince's jaw tightened, and his hands gripped the parchment a little too firmly. For 3 days, Alexander said nothing about the letter. He attended his lessons, practiced his swordsmanship with Marcus, and joined the family for meals as usual. But Marcus noticed the change in him. The prince was quieter than normal, more thoughtful. Sometimes Marcus would catch him staring out the window toward the direction of Millbrook, his expression distant and troubled. On the 4th day, Alexander called Marcus to his private chambers. The prince was sitting at his writing desk, but instead of books or letters, the desk was covered with something unexpected: jewelry. Alexander's personal collection of rings, necklaces, and ceremonial pins lay spread across the wooden surface, glinting in the afternoon sunlight. "Sir Marcus," Alexander said without looking up, "how much do you think these are worth?" Marcus studied the jewelry with surprise. There were pieces that had been given to Alexander for his various birthdays and ceremonial occasions. Some were family heirlooms, passed down through generations of royal children. Others were gifts from foreign dignitaries and wealthy nobles. Together, they represented a considerable fortune. "Your Highness," Marcus replied carefully, "these items are quite valuable. Some are priceless family treasures. May I ask why you're considering their worth?" Alexander finally looked up, and Marcus was struck by the determination in the young man's eyes. "I want to sell them," the prince said simply. "All of them." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. "Your Highness, surely you don't mean—" "I mean every word, Sir Marcus. I want to sell these things and use the money to buy grain for Millbrook. And not just Millbrook, for any village that needs help this winter." Marcus sank into a chair, his mind reeling. "Prince Alexander, you must understand what you're suggesting. These are not just valuable objects. They are symbols of your position, your heritage. Some of these pieces have been in your family for centuries." Alexander picked up a particularly ornate ring, a ruby surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his great-grandfather. "What good is heritage if people are dying while I wear pretty jewels? What kind of symbol am I if I represent wealth that sits unused while children go hungry?" The conviction in the prince's voice was unmistakable. This was not a momentary impulse or teenage rebellion. Marcus could see that Alexander had thought this through carefully. The prince had made his decision, and nothing would change his mind. "Your father will never approve of this," Marcus said quietly. "I know," Alexander replied. "That's why I'm not asking for his permission. I'm 15 years old, Sir Marcus. In 3 years I'll be 18 and officially an adult. These jewels were given to me personally. They are mine to do with as I choose." Marcus knew the prince was right legally, but he also knew the political and social implications of what Alexander was planning. The royal family's image, their relationships with other nobles who had given some of these gifts, the very concept of royal dignity, all of it would be called into question. "There will be consequences, Your Highness," Marcus warned. "People will not understand. They will say you are naive, that you are destroying royal traditions." Alexander stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the palace grounds stretched out in perfectly manicured beauty. Beyond the walls, Marcus knew, lay a world where not everyone was so fortunate. "Let them say what they want," Alexander said finally. "I would rather be called naive than heartless. I would rather break tradition than let people suffer when I have the power to help them." In that moment, Marcus realized that the boy he had been protecting all these years had become a man. And not just any man, but the kind of leader the kingdom desperately needed. It was also the moment Marcus began to understand that his own role in the prince's life was about to change forever. The next morning, Prince Alexander woke before dawn and quietly gathered his jewelry into a leather pouch. Marcus had barely slept, torn between his duty to protect the prince and his growing admiration for the young man's courage. When Alexander emerged from his chambers, Marcus was waiting in the hallway, fully dressed and ready. "You don't have to come with me," Alexander said softly, noticing the conflict in his guard's eyes. "With respect, Your Highness." "Yes, I do," Marcus replied. "It's my job to protect you, wherever you go and whatever you choose to do." They left the palace through a side gate that Marcus knew well from his many years of service. The streets of the capital city were quiet in the early morning light, with only a few merchants and workers beginning their daily routines. Alexander had dressed in simple clothes, hoping to avoid recognition, but his noble bearing was hard to disguise. Their first stop was at the shop of Master Henrik, the city's most respected jeweler. Henrik had served the royal family for years, creating custom pieces and maintaining the crown jewels. When he saw Prince Alexander enter his shop so early in the morning, his weathered face showed immediate concern. "Your Highness," Henrik said, bowing deeply. "How may I serve you this morning? Is there some emergency with the royal collection?" Alexander placed the leather pouch on Henrik's workbench. "Master Henrik, I need you to evaluate these pieces and arrange for their sale. I want to convert them to gold coins as quickly as possible." Henrik's hands trembled slightly as he opened the pouch and saw the contents. His eyes widened as he recognized piece after piece of the prince's personal collection. "Your Highness, surely there must be some mistake. These are your ceremonial pieces, your family heirlooms." "There is no mistake," Alexander said firmly. "I need them sold, and I need the money to purchase grain and winter supplies for villages in need." The old jeweler looked from the prince to Marcus, searching for some sign that this was a joke or a test. Marcus's solemn expression confirmed that the prince was completely serious. Henrik sat down heavily on his stool, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being asked. Your Highness, the value of these pieces. It would be enough to feed several villages through the winter. But the scandal. Your father will be furious. The nobles who gave you some of these gifts will feel insulted. I understand the risks, Alexander replied. But I also understand that people are going to die this winter if no one helps them. Can you arrange the sale or not? Henrik nodded slowly. It will take some time to find buyers for pieces of this quality and significance. Perhaps a week, maybe 2. Too long, Alexander said. People can't wait that long. What if you were to purchase them yourself at a fair price? You could then sell them to collectors at your convenience. The request put Henrik in an impossible position. He didn't have enough money to purchase such valuable items outright, but he also couldn't refuse a direct request from the prince. After a moment of thought, he made a decision that would change his life forever. I will do it, Your Highness. I will mortgage my shop and my home to raise the funds. Give me until tomorrow evening. Alexander clasped the old man's shoulder gratefully. Master Henrik, the kingdom will remember your kindness. Word of the prince's actions began to spread before the day was over. Henrik, despite his promise of discretion, had to contact several colleagues to arrange the financing. By afternoon, rumors were flying through the noble circles of the capital. Some said the prince had been robbed. Others whispered that he had gambling debts or had been blackmailed. King William learned of his son's actions when Lord Chancellor Baldwin burst into the royal study, his face red with indignation. Your Majesty, Baldwin announced, there are disturbing reports about Prince Alexander. Multiple sources say he has sold his personal jewelry collection to that jeweler Henrik. The king's face darkened as he processed this information. Send for my son immediately, he commanded. When Alexander appeared before his father an hour later, Marcus stood silently beside him as protocol demanded. The king's anger was barely contained as he stared at his son. Explain yourself, King William said coldly. Alexander straightened his shoulders and met his father's gaze directly. I sold my jewelry to raise money for emergency food supplies. Villages like Millbrook are facing starvation this winter. Without my permission, without consultation, without regard for your position or your family's reputation. Yes, sir. The simple admission seemed to infuriate the king even more. Do you have any idea what you've done? The nobles will think we're in financial trouble. Foreign ambassadors will question our stability. And the precedent you've set. What happens when every prince and princess in every kingdom decides to sell their ceremonial items for whatever cause strikes their fancy? Alexander remained calm in the face of his father's anger. I can only answer for my own choices, father. And my choice is to help people when I have the power to do so. Your power comes from your position, which you have just undermined completely. My power comes from doing what is right, regardless of my position. The words hung in the air like a challenge. King William stared at his son, seeing perhaps for the first time that the boy had truly become a man with his own convictions. Marcus watched the confrontation with a heavy heart, knowing that the relationship between father and son had changed forever. You are confined to the palace until further notice, the king declared finally. And this transaction will be reversed. Henrik will return the jewelry and the money will be returned to him. Alexander's calm facade cracked for the first time. Father, please, the grain has already been purchased. The supplies are being loaded onto wagons as we speak. People are counting on this help. Then they will have to find help elsewhere. People will die. People die anyway, Alexander. That is the harsh reality of ruling a kingdom. You cannot save everyone, and trying to do so will destroy the very institution that gives you the power to help anyone at all." Alexander looked at his father with something Marcus had never seen before. Disappointment. Not anger, not defiance, but the deep sadness of someone realizing that someone they love does not share their most fundamental values. "I understand, Your Majesty," Alexander said formally. "May I be excused?" The king waved his hand dismissively, and Alexander bowed before leaving the room. Marcus followed, his heart breaking for both the prince and the king. He understood the king's position, but he also understood that something beautiful and noble had just been crushed. That evening, as Marcus stood guard outside Alexander's chambers, he heard something that nearly brought tears to his eyes. Through the door, he could hear the young prince quietly crying, not for himself, but for the people who would not receive the help he had tried to provide. Marcus spent the next 3 days in turmoil. During the day, he performed his duties as Alexander's guard, but the young prince barely spoke to anyone. Alexander attended his lessons, ate his meals, and followed all the rules of his confinement, but the spark that had always defined him seemed to have dimmed. On the 4th morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Master Henrik appeared at the palace gates, asking specifically to speak with him. They met in the palace gardens, away from curious ears. "Sir Marcus," Henrik said quietly, "I need you to know something. Before the king's order came to reverse the transaction, I had already sent the grain wagons to Millbrook and 3 other villages." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Henrik, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the prince's plan worked. The food reached the people who needed it. I used my own money to complete the purchases after the king ordered me to return the jewelry. Prince Alexander doesn't know this. I haven't been able to get word to him." The old jeweler's eyes were filled with emotion as he continued. "Sir Marcus, I've served the royal family for 30 years. I've made beautiful things for beautiful people who live beautiful lives. But I've never been part of something as important as what that young prince tried to do. When I saw the faces of those village people receiving the grain, I understood what true nobility looks like." Marcus gripped the man's shoulder. "Henrik, you could lose everything for this. The king will be furious when he learns what you've done." "Let him be furious," Henrik replied. "I'm an old man, Sir Marcus. I've made enough money and created enough pretty baubles. If I lose my shop, at least I'll lose it for something that mattered." That evening, Marcus sat alone in his quarters, staring at the formal letter of resignation he had written and rewritten a dozen times. He had served the royal family faithfully for over 2 decades, but he could no longer reconcile his duty to the crown with his conscience. He thought about all the years he had spent teaching Alexander about honor, duty, and doing what was right. Now he faced the terrible irony that following those very principles might mean leaving the prince when he needed support most. But Marcus also knew that staying would mean becoming complicit in a system that punished goodness and rewarded cold calculation. The next morning, Marcus requested a private audience with King William. The king received him in his private study, surrounded by maps and documents of state business. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. "I am here to submit my resignation from the Royal Guard, effective immediately." King William looked up from his papers, genuinely surprised. "Marcus, this is unexpected. Have you been offered a better position elsewhere?" "I'm sure we can match any reasonable offer." "No, Your Majesty, this has nothing to do with money or opportunity." "Then what? You've served this family with distinction for 23 years. Your loyalty has been unquestioned." Marcus took a deep breath before responding. "My loyalty remains unquestioned, Your Majesty, but my loyalty is to the ideals this crown is supposed to represent, not just to the crown itself. When those two things come into conflict, I must choose the ideals." The king's expression hardened as he began to understand. This is about Alexander's foolish gesture with the jewelry. It is about a young man who tried to do something noble and was punished for it. It is about a system that values appearances more than lives. It is about my own failure to stand up for what I believe is right. King William stood up, his face flushed with anger. You forget yourself, Sir Marcus. You forget your place and your duty. No, Your Majesty. I remember both very clearly. My place is with honor, and my duty is to what is right, even when it is difficult. You are dismissed, the king said coldly. Marcus bowed formally. Thank you, Your Majesty, for the honor of serving your family. I hope someday you will be as proud of your son as I am. Before leaving the palace forever, Marcus made one final stop. He knocked softly on Alexander's chamber door and entered when the prince called for him to come in. Alexander was sitting by the window, reading a book of philosophy that Marcus had given him years ago. Sir Marcus, Alexander said, looking up with surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you today. Your Highness, I've come to say goodbye. I have resigned my position and will be leaving the palace today. Alexander stared at him in shock. But why? You've done nothing wrong. This is all because of me, isn't it? Because of what I tried to do? Marcus sat down across from the prince, his formal demeanor softening. Your Highness, Alexander, what you tried to do was the most right thing I've seen in 23 years of palace service. I'm not leaving because of you. I'm leaving because of what I learned from you. I don't understand. You showed me that sometimes doing what is right means standing alone, even when everyone else tells you you're wrong. You taught me that principles matter more than position. I can't continue to serve a system that punished you for having the courage to live by those principles. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, you've been like a father to me. I can't bear the thought that my actions cost you your career. Marcus smiled sadly. Alexander, my career was already complete the day you decided to sell those jewels. Nothing I did for 23 years before that moment matters as much as what you did in that one moment. You didn't cost me my career. You gave it meaning. As Marcus prepared to leave, Alexander stood up suddenly. Wait, he said. There's something I need to know. Did my father really stop Henrik from delivering the grain? Did those people receive any help at all? Marcus paused at the door, thinking of his conversation with Henrik. He could tell Alexander the truth about what Henrik had done, but he also knew it would put the old jeweler at risk if the prince accidentally revealed the information. Instead, Marcus chose his words carefully. Your Highness, sometimes the most important victories are the ones that happen in people's hearts, not in the world. You showed the kingdom what a true prince looks like. That lesson will outlast any grain shipment. Marcus left the palace that afternoon with nothing but his personal belongings and his honor intact. As he walked through the capital city toward his childhood village of Millbrook, he felt lighter than he had in years. He was no longer Sir Marcus, royal guard to Prince Alexander. He was simply Marcus, a man who had learned from the best teacher he ever had that doing right matters more than doing well. 6 months later, when news reached him that Prince Alexander had been named heir apparent and was implementing new policies to help struggling villages throughout the kingdom, Marcus smiled and knew that his decision to resign had been the right one after all. Sometimes the greatest service you can provide to someone you care about is showing them that their principles are worth standing up for, even when it costs you everything.